left with not agreeing, but that's fine. That's the nature of debate. What will happen over time, I think, is the council, and I've seen it on other councils too, from the start to further on, council will come to discipline itself a little bit more. I don't know anybody in this room who likes to get home by any means at 10 to 1 in a council meeting. So I think council will come to decide what is really important to say and what is less important to say. And when something's already been canvassed well, to just say I agree or something of that nature. I think we're already moving in that direction. So I would hate to throw out the improved debate that this council has seen simply to get home a half an hour earlier. If need be, I'll make that sacrifice. Thank you.
Councillor Sanders.
Thank you. I prefer the speak once. I'm not a night person, so going home at once, great. I've just woken up at that point. But I think if we can be succinct and prepared when we come to our meetings and know the information and really think that we can do it once. Certainly there's an occasion, as Councillor Dermott has said, that it's nice if you can refute or add another comment and if that's acceptable. But sometimes the conversation goes on and on and on and repeats itself over and over and I think creates often more confusion than good decision making. So I prefer to stay with one comment unless it's really necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Haynes and then Murdoch.
I'm going to support the motion in part because I think we have moved on in the last several months as a council and that we're doing less debate before the motion is made. And it's once the motion is on the floor that we're having the debate. Where I think we can have more discipline for ourselves is to avoid repeating. And one of the things I'm working on is not repeating what others said and trying to bring something new that maybe when I was speaking before it slipped my mind, or listening to others I think, there's this other point that needs to be made here. This is a chamber of sober thought, and I think the opportunity of a second time around, at the courtesy of the chair, is appropriate. So I support this motion, recognising that repeating what others have said is not necessarily that useful to the debate. So I personally will try to avoid that, and if I use the second time, bring forward something new and pertinent. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Murdoch.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll support this. I mean, it's something that hasn't really been enforced this term, and I don't think we're really that worse off for it. I do agree that I think we're getting better at being disciplined in the way we debate, but still allowing some flexibility for appropriate debate. So I think this term will see that process honed and we'll get much better at it. So if we take this out, it's really just acknowledging what's become a reality. I do want to point out, though, that we're cutting ourselves considerable slack that we don't afford to the public. Now, you know, we're all elected to make the points that we want to make, but we do make sure that members of the public only come up once on an item. So let's be respectful of that, perhaps remind ourselves that that's the protocol for the public, and if we are able to get in most of our comments the first go-round, I think that's certainly preferable, and I'm sure would be appreciated by the members of the public who had to do the same.
I think this, if I just could, I think this is good. I think it's an opportunity for discipline. If we're strictly held to speaking the one time, it puts me in a difficult position of looking to see who should speak next when there's multiple hands up. And so that puts a position of bias here, which I'd rather not have. Second, I think we learn a lot by going around and hearing from each other. And when you've heard something interesting, intelligent, new fact, or whatever, you're kind of in that, ooh, me, I've got something else to say or to add to it. But it'll kind of lock us into just sort of amendments and motions and amendments. And I think the discussion is worthwhile. I've found it very worthwhile. And, got elected and I sit here and I have this job and I've got things that I do in the organization here. But it's also a learning place for me as well. And I'm learning from you and I'm learning from the public. And I want to hear as much as I can. I want to get home as well. But I think going around, and sometimes it takes a few times to go around, we don't always do it. I think it's been good for the results. I really do. And if we're hearing from council members that it wasn't like this at the time and it was needed and we got to it, I think we should keep moving forward. That's my sense. Councillor Worthman.
We keep going around and speaking against it. What we've talked about is debate. And 99 meetings out of 100, whether it's my good councillor friend on my right or my left or across, he makes a motion and states his position. He doesn't wait to see, or she doesn't wait to see what councillors have to say. They really don't care. We really don't care what they say. We state our position. And so there is no debate. As I've seen, as I've sat here, even over the last 8 months, I don't see a lot of debate. We state our positions. If we're first, the last guy, what he says, or the last lady, they might as well not speak because the rest have made up their mind already. So, it's a word we might think about. Debate.
All right, thank you. If there's no more discussion on the debate, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed? That carries. No, sorry? Councillor Sanders was opposed. All right, so that still carries. Councillor Sanders in opposition.
Oh, I better oppose it too.
I better oppose it too. Okay, so I missed that. That was up before. So Councillor Sanders and Councillor Worthman in opposed, matching their stated positions. And that carries. So I think we're done with this agenda item now. If there's anything else, Councillor Haynes.
Sorry, as we did when we brought this first to the chamber, I think it would be good to touch base in 6 to 8 months again and see if it needs refining. So I'd like a motion to make a motion to the floor, and if there's a seconder, that 6 to 8 months from now we have a feedback and see if we need to amend any of this.
All right, before that goes any further, I think what we have here is recommendations to go into staff to actually recraft a new bylaw. That bylaw will come back, and I don't know what time that bylaw is coming back. We might want to have the bylaw back first, and then when it's in place, then come back. And it's really here or there, but I'm just throwing that out there.
I like it, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did sort of focus on where Councillor Bryce started at the beginning, and I expressed I have discomfort with this delegation and how that debate or whatever goes on afterward. And although we've discussed a few amendments here, and I don't know what the answer to this is, but it's been suggested that we don't restrict ourselves to not making a motion. But it's always, we don't deal with any president or delegation the same way, and sometimes we make a motion to send it to staff or off somewhere else, but there's nothing clear on what to do with this. I've looked at some other jurisdictions. Comox has that they don't deal with it until the following committee of the whole with the issue. They will deal with it the night of the issue if 2/3 of the council that's in attendance will support dealing with the issue at that time. So that's just one jurisdiction. They all seem to deal with it differently. But
I think there's a motion on the floor.
Is there a motion on the floor?
You seconded my motion.
Yes, there is.
The suggestion that we time it to the report, I accepted that as a friendly amendment.
Oh, okay, I thought you acquiesced to
Oh,
the...
you rescinded that.
Madam Clerk, could you give us some clarification? Because I think there is.
Yes, that is correct. The motion is still on the floor, and it is that staff prepare a report, that this be reviewed in 6 to 8 months following, with the understanding, of course, Mr. Mayor, that the bylaw would come forward, and at that point, would trigger from that point forward the 6 to 8 months.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Sanders had the floor. She was speaking. I was assuming she was going to get to the nature of the motion at the end.
Well, mine would be subject to that if there are any other councillors here that have some other list of items they would like to be dealt with, that we do that. And my suggestion is that I'd like to see some recommendation, whether it be that if an issue comes forward, the motion is that we send it to the appropriate advisory committee. Just something so that we have something clear what we're going to do each time, rather than I always get worried when we send it off to staff and what falls off the edge of their desk while we do that, or should we send a strategic plan? To me, I'm very uncomfortable that we don't deal with any of the consistency. So I guess what I'm saying, could we amend it to add what I'm suggesting, and perhaps other councillors have things that they want to suggest, and we feel that we have that opportunity to all
Okay.
put our points in. Thank
All
you.
right, so I think it's very, very different from the motion that's on the floor. I understand what you're saying.
Yes.
I think with what you're suggesting, we're going to get to the issue of what we do as council. And at council, we really do two things. We pass resolutions and we pass bylaws. And we're connected to those two things. And it sounds like you're wanting to codify it into the bylaw of how we go about connecting those things together.
Well, yes, because that's what we're discussing, is this bylaw.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so let's get back to the motion then. If there's no more discussion on the motion, I'll call the question on it. All in favor? Opposed? There's none opposed, and so that motion carries unanimously. I'll open the floor to any other changes. Councillor Sanders?
So my change is what I would like to suggest on the delegations that we, it's been a suggestion we don't tie our hands, but I'd like to see some clarity in what comes back, the suggestions of where, if we want to make forward a delegation suggestion somewhere, where those, the options could be for that.
All right, so it's a recommendation, it's a request to staff to then have them come back with options for handling delegations, handling follow-ups to delegations.
Yes, if we wish to make a follow-up.
All right.
Thank you.
The second motion.
Second by Councillor Bryce, and I'll give the seconder a chance to speak to it.
I'm seconding it because I hope it will breathe new life into it. As I read the report from staff, it was kind of open season, I thought. You all come on down after the delegation and we're going to be making decisions. And that worries me. It worried me when I made my first comments and it worries me now. So I am seconding this motion in hopes that there will be a very serious look at the issue of what actions council takes as a result of delegations, based on principles such as due notice and an ability. I can't, for instance, as a councillor, just off the cuff make a motion and put it before council without having given a notice of motion. That's part of our procedures. But the way we're operating now, we're suggesting that delegations can come with some bright idea, and before you know it, the machinery here starts moving along and taking some action on it. So I share Councillor Sanders' concerns, and I would like to see, and I think in fairness to people coming before us, sometimes I think we make motions so that we make the group feel good. We heard you, we want to do something, we want to, and I think delegations that come before us should be told, these are the procedures that may result from your delegation exclusively. So, as I say, whether that will find favor with the people who advise us on this, I have no way of knowing. But in my estimation, even though we haven't had a situation where things have gone to a point where we've taken action that has been detrimental, I feel sometimes we're right at that wire, and I hope that we can all agree to how we're going to handle those delegations and what kind of actions we'll take that night as opposed to waiting to the next council meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes, and then Durham.
So I appreciate what Councillor Bryce and Councillor Sanders are bringing forward. And my recall is that we did have from the staff at one time a little chart that talked about some of the things that can happen after we've listened to a delegation. I'll see if I can recall them. 1, do nothing, just listen, be educated and see what it's about. 2, maybe refer it to staff. We've done that. 3, refer it to advisory committees. We've done that. 4, refer it to a town hall. We've done that. So there are a number of options, but I get the point is that maybe we need some more discipline around that so we have an understanding of where we can go. How best to then bring that forward and have it as something that we all work with. I do believe that there was a staff report, and it may have been attached in a bulletin at one time. on these options. So how do we then bring that to life and give ourselves some clarity? Bearing in mind, one idea with the delegation is that we were initially going to just listen.
Councillor Dermott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with the concerns of Councillor Sanders and Councillor Bryce. Councillor Bryce mentioned due notice, and that is appropriate. Sometimes things come forward in delegation that the general public had no idea that was coming forward, and so they might have a concern with what was brought forward, and they have limited opportunity to speak, in fact none at that meeting. And that also involves the concern of due process, where when we have a delegation, we are most often going to be getting one point of view on a particular topic. I think we have to be very, very careful what kind of action we take without having opportunities for other points of view to come forward and be properly considered. So I think, again, that this could be referred to staff, or staff to help us to define this. But as a rough rule, I think we should be able to say at any point, we suggest you go to advisory committees. That doesn't even need a motion, really, and it doesn't bind the council to any kind of action. For many other situations, even referring it to staff, there is the question of what do you want to have staff report back on, and that sometimes requires other points of view to come forward to have that properly shaped. So I think we should more commonly take the view of what Councillor Sanders pointed out in Comox, where they send it to the next, if they feel they need to send it somewhere to be considered for debate, they send it to the next committee of the whole, or next available committee of the whole. That's probably a good place to start. You will have, on some cases, from some delegations, an emergency situation where they ask you to do something like write a letter to somewhere that is time sensitive, that by the time the next committee of the whole occurs, it's all over. And those kind of situations, again, a provision that Comox has where you either have 2/3 of council or 3/4, or whatever you decide upon, who agree that that action in this place, in this situation, could be considered. I think those kind of guidelines would help us be very consistent and appropriate in how we deal with delegations. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Madam Clerk, could you please read the motion back one more time?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For clarification on the, okay, so that staff, our council requests staff to provide in the council procedure bylaw for clarification on the action that can be taken by council following receipt of a delegation.
All right, so what we're voting on here is something that's going to be put into the bylaw. But I've heard some talk about guidelines. Guidelines are important. They need to provide, the guidelines are useful for staff, they're useful for the public, they're useful for ourselves. They create consistency, they provide expectations. And ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to help guide people on to where's the best place to go to be heard. Is it council? Is it advisory committees to come as a delegation? Is it to then come back to council? Is it committee of the whole? And so forth. If we're going to be dealing with things in emergency nature, it becomes very difficult to then codify that. It then starts moving towards a guideline. So I'm not sure how we're going to do that, but I think there's been enough debate here that it's going to go back to staff. And staff are going to come back with some advice for us on what possibly to include in the bylaw. There was a hand up from Councillor Bryce, and then Councillor Pound.
Following on your thoughts, Mr. Mayor, council at any time is in control of its own procedures, so if there's something of urgent nature, council can, by motion, vary it. So I think we've got that. I think what we want is, what's the meat and potato, the usual way we do business? And I guess the part that scared me was in the report we've got here, where it says a procedural restriction to not allow motions at the same meeting the delegation is heard is not recommended. While such a restriction allows council more time to consider both the information presented and whether action is warranted, it would likely be more hindrance than a help. Such a restriction only delays the approval of an action that would otherwise have been dealt with at the meeting the delegation was heard. Well, that, unless it's just a motion to refer, some innocuous thing like that, in fact, that's precisely the thing I think we don't want to do. It's just hear a delegation, not hear from the public, just in our own wisdom, make a decision and go for it. I think that in fact is a restriction we do want to put on ourselves and on delegations, so they know we're not going to sort of move things along the pipe immediately after hearing them. So as they say, I'm just reading from the report that we got, and that definitely was much more of a delegation comes, council hears it, makes a decision, and away she goes.
Thank you. Councillor Planton and Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for I believe, I can't support this. I think this is unfortunately a little bit lackadaisical process. We got a report in the spring from Mr. Laidlaw with the options. To ask now for another report when we could have done our homework and said, here's what we want in the report, I think is asking for a delay that's unnecessary if we had these concerns. So my comment would be defeat this motion and then bring in. You can refer to a future committee of the whole. You can refer to an advisory committee. You can refer to open forum. All of those things that I think we already know what they are. I don't think we need to have another report that's only going to bog down getting this bylaw back to us. So I'm in favor of not doing these crazy motions on the night of. I'm fine with that. So let's codify it tonight. I don't think we need to wait months for another report.
Any more discussion? Councillor Bryce, back to you.
Well, I guess it was so obvious, I would have thought it would have been inculcated in this recommendation that we're looking at tonight. I mean, it comes from the same office, so it isn't so obvious to staff. Otherwise, it would have presumably been here, in my opinion, but maybe I'm reading things that aren't there.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Councillor Sanders that started off this conversation, then Councillor Haynes.
I have to agree, if it was so obvious or everybody knew, it would have come across that way. Because I've been uncomfortable from this beginning of this, and I got the directions and how we were to deal with them, and I certainly didn't read them the same way. And what I don't like to see is when we're inconsistent as a council, and I'll use two examples I could think of, and I'm sure there's more. When the little girl came with goats, and we all thought it was wonderful, and on we sent it, and we approved goats. But the lady came who formed the deer committee, and we didn't even respond to her. So there is an inconsistency, if you're not cute and have goats, or, I'm just being a little tongue-in-cheek there, but, that's what I like to see as a council, that we are consistent and we know what we're doing. So I think, had it been obvious, it would have been in this report. Thank you.
Councillor Haynes.
I'm going to disagree that we have to be consistent, and I'm not entirely sure that the support has done a disservice, because I think what the report is saying is council decides, not staff, because of the range of matter we may address. The lady, if it's the same one I'm thinking of, that wanted us to put plantings up in Mount Doug to draw the deer out of Cordova Bay, was something the council listened to. We did not decided not to send it on to advisory committee or to someone else. In the case of the deer, we listened and we thought, okay, let's send that to the advisory committee. The goats, I apologize. In the case of Glendenning, it went to a committee of the whole. In the case of the EDPA, it went to a system of open houses and town halls. This is based on delegations. So the initial template from staff was to give us certainty, but not to prescribe a narrow certainty, like one or two choices. It gave us a range of choices. And I do support what Councillor Plant just said, is that having done this for 8 months, I think as council, we can say what are the actions that we're prepared to take from a delegation. And I'm worried about sending it back to staff for another report. We can do that, but I'm inclined to think that amongst the 9 of us, we can structure this tonight and have it done.
I think that we can. I think it is getting quite late. It's now past 10 o'clock.
It goes to 12.
I know. Many people are waiting in the audience, including our staff, patiently for the next item. My sense of this is that there are really two ways you come up and present to us. You present for information, or you present for information and action. Council, I think, is the place to present for information. Advisory committees, having gone through this process, is the better place to present for information or for action. Committee meeting, an advisory committee meeting, the chair can regulate the agenda, and if it's a complicated issue and the room is packed, and it takes 2 hours to go through the discussion, it goes through 2 hours, and then a recommendation is made and it may come to council. To have that happen here on a regular basis at council, where we have a full room here, makes it very difficult for us to get through our business. And as much as I want to keep this as open as possible, I think it's tenuous right now, and it's stretched, and I do think we need to rein it in a little bit. I don't like it. It kind of goes against my beliefs, but I think it's necessary, and I think we'll be better off for it. So I would just put that out there, that there's a place for information, and there's a place for information action, and I think that is our advisory committees. We've had them for a long time. We've opened it up a little bit, but I think we need to now structure it and create the expectations for the staff, ourselves, and the public of where to be heard and where action can be taken.
Could you repeat the last part, Mr. Mayor? 'Cause I thought you got us to where we could recommend it to advisory committees and that would be it, but then you opened it up to the staff and give us other recommendations.
No, I'm splitting this into two. I basically made a commentary on where I think we should have public speak for information and speak for information and expected action taken. And then the bit that I followed up on was, I forgot. It's really late.
So would a motion then that delegations that are delivering information and seeking action would have the result of being referred to advisory committees?
I think the original motion is strong. It came from Councillor Sanders, and she wants to address an issue that I think we all recognize. I think we have some slightly different views on how it should be addressed, but I think we can simply get that back from staff, and when we see the bylaw, then we can decide at that time, much in the same way that we're deciding now, whether we want to go ahead with that or not. What I would like to see us get to, the point I'd like to see us get to, is that we have this notice for ourselves, the staff, and the public on expectation, and then that, I would say enshrines, but is a very, very strong guideline of where business should occur here in council. And I think there's a great difference between council, committee of the whole, and advisory committees. Advisory committees, I think, is a better place to have the long debate, to have the room full, and have an individual come in and say, I'm passionate about this, or bring in a petition, or bring in the neighbors. But the council, it is really holding up the business of council. And I don't mind being here late, but I think one of the reasons that we're discussing this now at the last meeting of the year is because of all the other things that have been on the agenda, is because of the way things have run. And I think we need to make it a bit more efficient. Not for the sake of going home, for the sake of efficiency. And so, with that, I think I can support the motion. Should I call the question? Madam Clerk, would you read it back one more time before we vote on it?
With pleasure, Mr. Mayor. This motion is that council requests staff to look into providing clarification in the council procedure bylaw on actions that council can take following the receipt of a delegation.
Before I call the vote, Councilor Plant, are you happy with this?
No, Mr. Mayor, we have that information. It was given to us. I'm sorry, Councillor German, you can shove your head at me in disrespect as much as you wish. That information was provided to council by that gentleman right there. So I don't know what's going to be different than what's going to be provided before.
I think for where we are and for the sake of the fact that we've gone through the debate, if it is just the cut and paste, then let's just let it be the cut and paste. Any more hands? All right, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Plant is opposed. That motion carries. All right, is there any more on this item before we move to the next item on the agenda? Seeing none, thank everybody for their contributions, and we'll move to the next item. Madam Clerk, would you please introduce the item for us? And the final item.
still want this stuff from
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This next item is the Youth Development Strategy and Implementation Plan 2016 to 2020. The report of the Director of Parks and Recreation is recommending the Council adopt the Youth Strategy and Implementation Plan. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, before I ask the applicant up, I would like to give an opportunity for council to ask questions of staff on the report. Seeing none, I'd like to ask the applicant to come forward. I believe we've got 2 speakers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be brief. I just want to give a couple of opening comments before I ask our staff from our Community Services Division to present to you tonight what was an item in the strategic plan and is the result of a very, very robust engagement process that involved the clientele who will be best served by this document once it is hopefully adopted by you tonight. So I'll ask Sandra Pearson, who's our Manager of Community Services, and Jason Jones, who is our Recreation Programmer, to present a brief overview of the document and the process they went through. They're supported here tonight by Dr. Neil Smith, who is the consultant, and Chris Filler, one of our other staff, who will be looking after some of the implementation. Thank you.
Oh, that was news. I thought that was the presentation. All right, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and councillors and the public for having us here tonight. We are very excited to share with you the results of the Youth Development Strategy and 5-year implementation plan. So what you'll see on the screen here is something called a Prezi. And so